Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Reddest Stone. So, we're going to be making something here that's a little intermediate. It's not for beginners, although I will try to explain it as best as possible, so don't be too frightened. But it's also not super advanced. It's not like we're making a computer here. So let me just show you what we're going to be making. Oops, it's off. If I turn this off, look at that. As you can see, it's a progress bar that counts up and then resets itself and starts all over again. But more importantly, if I come here, turn it off, it doesn't just turn off. Oops. In that case, it was at the end of a cycle, but if I do this, if I turn it off, it pauses exactly where it left off and stays that way. And if I turn it on again, it resumes from where it left off and then continues its cycle. So obviously this doesn't have to be a progress bar. It can be any kind of countdown that you want. And it's actually extremely extendable so that you can make it as long as you want, with as many steps in between as you want. You might have noticed the steps here are 2 lights each. You can make it as many steps as you want, though. So let's get started. Let me show you the redstone. And again, don't freak out. I'm going to try to explain it as much as I can. So here's the redstone. I'm sure you heard the pistons going, because the pistons are the easiest way to break a circuit in Minecraft. So, I'm going to take a quick screenshot of this and label all the parts for now. Then I'm going to show you how to build it, and then I'm going to go and explain everything in detail. So here are all the parts. And let's go and take a look. So I think I'm actually going to explain everything first, and then we'll get to building it. I will put an annotation on the screen if you want to just skip to the building. So the way this works is this part here is just a clock that keeps feeding pulses into this part, which is the actual stepper or countdown. So what happens is, every time this block here gets a pulse, it will step down 1 step in this countdown and stop. If it gets another pulse, it'll step down again, and so on until it gets to the end. And then if the countdown gets to the very last step here, this will turn off, which will turn this torch on, and go through here, which resets the whole thing. And it resets the whole thing by pulling this block out, which cuts this circuit off, and then sending a signal into here, which turns this signal back on, because by the time the countdown is over, this line will be turned off, so we just turn it back on. So the way this works is using repeater locks, and repeater locks are very useful indeed. So the way repeater locks work, and I don't remember if I mentioned this in a previous episode or not, but bear with me if I did, is if you have a repeater just sitting in a line of redstone, normally what it does is it boosts the signal to full strength and also adds a little bit of delay, which you can change from 1, 2, 3, or 4 steps of delay. 4 ticks of delay, I'm sorry. And that's the way repeaters are usually used. But if you pull a full strength signal, like from another repeater, into the side of a repeater, it will lock. As shown by this little bar here, that means it's a lock. And what that means is, if I were to just suddenly take this out, this piece of redstone here, there would be no signal coming into this repeater, but it would continue to output full strength anyway, because it's locked in that position. Now if I take this redstone out, and then I turn off this repeater, then this will turn off, because it will unlock this repeater and allow it to pull the signal back from the input. So what happens here is this is effectively a monostable circuit or a pulse generator. So when you put a signal into this block, it will turn off this torch, which turns this torch on, which makes this whole thing, this piston, will go up. It'll retract, is the word I'm looking for. But it'll retract because this block here will be off because of that torch, so it'll retract. But as soon as it retracts, this torch will turn on, and then it'll extend this piston again. So the result is this block will move up and then down really quickly. And that's kind of the basis for the entire countdown, because what happens is when this block moves up and down, it sends a short pulse of no signal out through this line, because the signal here is coming from these locked repeaters. So if you break this circuit by pulling this block up, this line gets turned off. When this line gets turned off, all of these like locking repeaters, I guess I could call it, they all turn off, and that unlocks all of these. But if you unlock this one as it is now, it'll still stay on because it's still getting an input. So the only thing that changes is the last one, which has no input, will be unlocked and turn off. And that would propagate through, except the pulse is so short that by the time the signal turns off here, it's already locked all of them back again. And so every time you do it, that same process repeats with each pulse, and the signal drops by one step along this line, and then, as I said, it gets to the end, it turns on, or it retracts this piston, which breaks this line and unlocks all of the repeaters here, and then it also powers them all so that this entire line lights back up again. And once the line lights back up, it turns this off, which extends the piston and locks everything back in place. So that's how this circuit works. Now, I do want to give a little credit where credit is due. This countdown design I actually found on a tutorial on YouTube, and unfortunately I cannot remember the username of the person who posted it. I've been looking for his video, I can't seem to find it again, so I'm very, very sorry to him. If I do find that video, I will post it in the description below. But I've made some key modifications. So in his tutorial, all of these counting repeaters just fed right into each other with no redstone in between it, which works as a countdown, but you can't get any output and you can't know where in the countdown you are. So it might be only powered up to here, but you have no way of knowing that. So I spaced them out a little bit and put some redstone coming out of each step so that we can actually get some output and figure out what step we're on. And as you can see here, I just ran all of these into inverters so that they all start off and it actually counts up instead of down. But you don't need those inverters. You can take these inverters out and have it count down if you want. That's perfectly fine. And as I said, it doesn't need to go into a progress bar. For example, you can put these into some kind of decoder and convert them into binary numbers if you wanted to, or something like that. You can do whatever you want with the output. So, yeah, so that's how it all works. And I also added the clock. This clock was not in his original design. He had a button here as the input, which meant you could automatically step it down whenever you wanted, or manually, I suppose. But it wouldn't automatically count down, and he also didn't have this reset here so that when it got to the end, you had to manually reset it. So I added a few things. Sorry. I added a few things, but the main countdown design, all credit to whoever made that video, who will be in the description as soon as I find it. And if you're watching this, whoever you were, feel free to please comment below and tell me how stupid I am for forgetting your name, and I will sincerely apologize. So, let's build this thing. So the first thing we see is, for the countdown to work, we need these repeaters separated by redstone, and repeaters going into them to lock them, right? So let's do that over here. So we have repeater, 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 repeater. And one thing you might notice, so there were 4 steps in this countdown, or count up. But there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 repeaters before the piston and 1 after. So that's important to note, that you will need 2 extra repeaters in that line, 1 before the piston and 1 after, in order to make this work properly. So in this case, we're just going to use the same 4, which means we need 1 extra piston here, and then, or sorry, 1 extra repeater there, 1 extra repeater there, and the piston will go in between. And only your actual countdown repeaters need to get locked. So that's these 4 bits, if you will. And basically, these just sort of go in a loop. So if you look here, you see that this input goes around and then loops back to the locks. So we can just do that now. So we have input here, oops, input here, 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 didn't mean to change that, input here, oh, nope, this is where the piston goes, sorry, see, this is what I get for not paying attention. That's where the piston goes. And then our output needs a repeater to pull from that block. Which actually it doesn't need a repeater, but I used a repeater here, so I'm just going to continue using that. And then we're going to have another piston here for the reset. That's our reset piston. And continue this again into the locks. And yes, I'm using a trackpad mouse, which is why it's a little difficult to maneuver here. So please bear with me with that. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is the reset, because it's just the easiest. So the reset works with a piston, as we know. So let's put a piston. Oops, I don't even have a piston. So let's grab a sticky piston, which is under redstone. And drop the piston here. Oops, I'm kind of standing in the piston. There we go. And this piston needs to be extended when not in reset mode, which is the opposite of its normal state, so we invert the signal here. And then we take, if you'll notice, I just used a repeater coming out of that block. I could have just gone around it, but one thing I've noticed is that when you power blocks, having redstone next to them is generally not a good idea, because you will get crosstalk. So instead, I just go right through the block with a repeater here, and then just go all through here. And this is completely extendable, by the way. So, whereas I have 4 outputs here, and 4 steps in the countdown, you could easily just add more repeaters in the countdown line, and more locks, just as far down as you wanted, and it would always work no matter what. So, that's a cool feature. I'm not sure about the timing on these countdown repeaters. They might need to be ticked up a little bit, but we're going to find out when we test this. So we come back into the original, and that's our loop. And just to make sure, did I need another repeater? I did. So let's put another repeater right here. Just because of the length of that line, the signal would have died out before it got to the end. So now on this end, we didn't have the result of the countdown line go into the reset, because as you saw, the normal state of the countdown is on. It's only off after it's been ticked down. So if we just use the result of this repeater, it would constantly be resetting itself. So we need to invert that signal, like that. And right now it hasn't been reset yet, but once we connect this up, it's going to reset the whole device to the start state. There we go. And we have our countdown. So this is our countdown line, but of course we have no way of actually ticking it down. So the way we do that, as we know, is with a little pulse generator here by putting a redstone torch on there. And then a redstone torch up here. And then a piston, sticky piston specifically, facing downwards right here. And we're pretty much done. So if we were to use a button for this, let me just grab any button. If we were to use a button for this, oops. That clearly did not work. I'm thinking... Ah, yes. I told you there would be some timing issues. So we have to make sure this countdown clock is at least 1 tick. I'm not sure if it's 2 ticks or 1 tick. I can't... out there. And as you can see, by the way, to see how much delay a locked repeater has, that bar is in the same place as the second torch would be on an unlocked repeater, so that's a good judge. And now I'm just going to manually reset this line. Alright, so now that everything is ticked up to 1 tick of delay... Nope. 2 ticks then. See, when you're redstoning, one thing you'll learn very quickly is you might need to experiment with a lot of things. A lot. Because you are very rarely going to have a new idea and then have everything turn out perfect the first time. And that's true of really making anything, whether it's writing a book or coding a program or redstoning. So keep that in mind and don't get discouraged. Alright, so there we go. So now if we tick down, now it doesn't tick down at all. That's lovely. Huh. Okay. Let's try making these 1 tick. And just that last kind of reset repeater, leave it at 2 ticks. Let's see if that fixes the problem. There we go, 1 tick. 1 more tick. 1 more tick, and then the last thing here. Reset. Yay, it works. Okay. So that's important to note then, is that this repeater here, which is the reset repeater, needs to be set to 2 ticks. Everything else can be set to 1 tick. And these locks don't need to be set to anything. You can just leave them unset or rather to the default. So I guess these are actually 1 tick, these are 2 ticks, and these are 3 ticks. So yeah, as long as you get that timing right, which again is right-click this twice to get 3 ticks, and then all of these, right-click once to get 2 ticks, and then all of the locks, don't right-click at all, leave them at 1 tick, and that solves your problem. So there we go. We have the entire countdown. Now all we have to do is make it automatic. So it already, every time it gets an input pulse, it'll tick down. And every time it ticks down, when it gets to the end, it automatically resets itself. So the only thing left to do is have it automatically tick down. And the way I did that is with an inverter clock. So there are many kinds of clocks you can make in Minecraft. The fastest one that I know of that doesn't use command blocks is a redstone comparator, which is a redstone comparator clock, in which you have these 3 blocks of redstone coming out of a comparator, have the comparator in subtraction mode, loop that comparator back into itself, and fully power it. And as you can see, you get a clock. And the reason you need to do 3 is because what this is doing is subtracting its output from itself, but the output takes 2 more ticks to get back to the comparator, so it actually is subtracting 2 less than the input from itself, which basically means as long as your input is over level 2, it's gonna the output is gonna oscillate back and forth between 15 and 2, or your input and 2, technically. And so if it's 2, it won't get to this third repeat. I can't seem to talk tonight, sorry. If it's 2, it won't get to this third redstone, but if it's 15, or anything more than 2, it will. So then you can have your circuit here, and this will be your clock. And that's the fastest clock I know of in Minecraft without using command blocks. Using command blocks, you can get one that goes every game tick, which is 20 times a second. And that's the fastest you could possibly go, because the game doesn't go any faster than that. But without command blocks, that comparator clock is the fastest clock I know of. However, we don't actually want that for this. See, what happens is with torches, if you toggle a torch more than, I think the number is 8 times in 3 seconds, it will burn out. And if it burns out, then you have to disconnect it from the circuit or replace it. Otherwise, it's just going to stay off, and that breaks your whole contraption. So since we need these torches to be slowly ticked down, we need a slower clock. And for that, I use an inverter clock. An inverter clock is basically just an inverter that loops back in on itself. So when the torch is on, it powers the line, which powers the block, which gets inverted and turns the torch off. But when the torch is off, the line is unpowered, so then the block is unpowered, so then the torch turns back on. So it loops around like that. You can actually do it with any odd number of inverters connected to each other, but you might as well just do it with one. So the key thing about an inverter clock is it's slower than the comparator clock to begin with, but also to avoid this torch and also this torch burning out, in this loop here we just put a repeater. And the repeater wouldn't work in the comparator clock because it boosts the signal back up to 15, and the comparator clock relies on the signal strength maintaining throughout the line. But here, all we need is this block to be powered or not. So we put a redstone repeater here, we move it up to 2 ticks, which is 1 right click, and that slows down our clock enough to power this block alternately without breaking the redstone torch. And every pulse from this clock into here is the same as if we would have pressed a button, and it ticks down the clock. So let's just build that clock really quickly, and this is actually the fastest part of this build. So all we need is this. Actually, we do need one more space because we need the redstone to be facing into that block and into the repeater, which means we need 3 spaces between the clock and our counter. So that means, by the way, if you're counting, is 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks out from your counter. You put a redstone torch on one side, a repeater set to 2 ticks on this side going into that torch, a repeater set to 1 tick. Technically you could set this repeater to anything, but I think the speed of your countdown is determined by the speed of the clock anyway, so I don't think that matters much. You could play around with it to see if it does anything. But we put redstone in between and link it back up to the clock. And there you have it. So that is the countdown clock, the automatic countdown clock which resets itself. And of course for the output, let me turn this off right now because it's kind of annoying. So the key thing here is that because this clock, hold on, 1 second, let me grab a lever, this is loud. So the key thing is that because this clock is what's actually triggering these countdown ticks, if you turn off this clock by keeping this block completely powered, say by a lever or by any other means, the clock will turn off, it will stop ticking down, but the countdown will remain at its last position. And so that's why this ends up being pausable rather than stoppable. Technically you could stop it, all you'd have to do is run a signal into the reset line here. But if you don't want to stop it, if you want to pause it, you have this ability, which is something that not a lot of redstone circuits have, the ability to pause midway. So that's how we make it pausable, by just turning off a clock and making it controlled by clock ticks. And then to get our output, all we have to do is run lines coming from these output spaces. So in my case, I did, in my case example over there, I inverted them so that it went from being a count down to a count up. But if you wanted to, you could make it a count up. Or, sorry, I made it a count up instead of a count down. But if you wanted to, you can make it the other way around. So you could actually have it move and turn off over time. Oh, one last thing. So while you can see that that works, those pistons are very noisy. So what I did to try to lessen the noise, you can't lessen the noise while it's counting down, but what you can do is turn off this tick piston while it's getting reset, because there is a delay during the time it's getting reset, and during that time, this ticking doesn't need to happen, it doesn't do anything. So the way I did that is I just took this output, this reset output, and in addition to running it into the reset line, I also ran it into that clock, so that as long as it was being reset, or in the process of being reset, the clock turned off and the piston turned off. So that just made it a little bit quieter when it's not actually counting down. So I can do that, pulling that out and running a repeater into the line, and that's all. So now if we run it again, you'll hear the noise from the pistons as it counts down, but while it's resetting, it will be silent. See? So that just makes it a little quieter, but it still works, which is the great part. So yeah, so like I said, you can turn this into a count up or a count down simply by adding or removing inverters after the outputs. You can extend it to however many steps you want in your countdown by just adding more of these repeaters and locks in a line. Note that if you do that, though, you might have to add more repeaters in the reset line since it goes around the actual locks. But no big deal. All that'll do is make the reset a little slower, which means it'll be a little quieter. You can run this out into a decoder for something. I've heard of people suggesting you take a countdown like this and actually run it out into another countdown, so that, for example, if you were to invert just this last output and ignored all the others, or even if you were to invert if you were to just take this reset output by itself and run it into a pulse for another countdown, you could actually do certain kinds of math. So for example, for every 4 pulses here, it would be 1 pulse in another countdown. So if we have another countdown of 4 pulses, then every time that finishes, that's 16 pulses total, right? So you can basically do multiplication by running the reset output of one of these countdowns into another countdown. So yeah, I hope you learned something, or enjoyed, or will build this, or will modify it, or whatever. I just hope you liked it. If you did, let me know by liking the video, or subscribing, or both, or commenting. Whatever you want to do, just let me know you liked it. Until next time, keep redstoning.